Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to March Mystery Madness. This is an 8-year-old BookTube event. It's been put on by Elizabeth. Lizzie Faye Loves Books. She's gathered a whole bunch of co-hosts. I'm one of them. This year again, very happy to do that. I love reading murder mysteries. I love thinking about them. I love all of their variety. And I love the questions that they raise for me. They're very tedious questions. They're very Jesuitically tedious questions for me. They don't really tend to interest other people. But you knew that when you married me. and I read another mystery. My reading plans last night were very delightfully interrupted by an absolutely wonderful and unexpected book that was fairly hefty and required a whole bunch of spelunking in the notes. But that still left room for other books, and one of them was another murder mystery. The sort of theme for March Mystery Madness this year is lather, rinse, repeat. And I am centering on the repeat part, on rereading things that I've had some experience with a long time ago, or that I really love, or that I really hate. And this book is one that I never read, but it is a series that I've read. I read one book in this series that I took out from the library in hardcover. And it wasn't this one. And it didn't blow me away at all. I had reservations about it, so I thought, okay, well, you found a paperback of this last year. Another book in that series. Time to go back to it, give it another try. This is by James Melville, and this one is called The Body War Brocade. And these are the Superintendent Otani mysteries. They're set in Japan, and the conceit, with a letter at the beginning and the address all throughout the book, is that Otani is telling these stories he's retired, and he's telling these stories from his career to James Melville. So Melville occurs throughout the book. At random intervals throughout the book, Otani is narrating this whole thing, and he will stop and say, and this, as you can well imagine, my dear James, confused me, that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting. Not enough is made of it. More should be made of it. That is more interesting than a lot of what goes on in this book, which is the story of, there is a dead body that is found underneath a pile of very rich, very heavy, no theater costumes. That's NOH, a classic kind of Japanese theater. One of the characters here is a dedicated amateur follower of no theater, a dedicated collector and whatnot. And it's his body that's found, and he's enormously wealthy. And so there's a gigantic estate that's up for grabs, and that is a time-honored, tried and true Charles de Gaulle, Champs-Élysées murder mystery gimmick in order to throw suspicion on people, because the cops will immediately look at who stood to benefit from the death of the will holder, and that's what they do in the course of this book. Superintendent Otani has a bunch of colleagues. He mostly outranks them. And the book is punctuated over and over again by them comparing notes and having conferences to figure out how far along the investigation is. In other words, a lot of what I talked about with the last book, which is a police procedural. This is very much a police procedural. Don't let the exotic locale fool you. It's very much a police procedural. We are never given to care or inquire about anybody else. The only characters in here are cops and their wives. Unlike, for instance, the last book, which at least had, the detective's, the superintendent's civilian friend. This doesn't have anything like that, unless you count James Melville, which might have been interesting if more weight had been placed on that in the course of the narration. But instead, it's just a little tick. Maybe that happens a little bit more in other books in the series. I think there are like 10 books in the series. I read a different one years and years ago in a hardcover from the library and thought it was blah. And I thought this one was blah as well, for a number of different reasons. I mean, once you have a dead body that shows up and there is a massive fortune at stake, no matter what the mystery author thinks, and they all have high hopes, they all do, no matter what the mystery author thinks, the culprit is easy to guess the minute you reveal that fact, the minute you reveal that money is at stake. Unless you're going to invent a culprit at the very last minute, which Mr. Knox has already told us you can't do, then the culprit is easy to guess. Maybe I've read too many of these things. Maybe it wouldn't be easy to guess for a lot of people. I don't know how popular this series was. It's got blurbs on it. The paperback has blurbs on it. But I never hear anybody talk about it. I certainly don't hear anybody miss it. And also, this is the second Otani mystery that I've read where I got to the end and thought, well, I'd be perfectly okay if I never read another one of these. Which is, that is an acid test for any kind of book in series. But also, another acid test is at the Brattle Bookshop. Just a little while ago at the Brattle Bookshop, there was a half a shelf of these in hardcover with plastic library dust jackets. The type of thing, if I didn't feel that way, if I felt like, ooh, I like that series, I'd have grabbed it in a heartbeat. I'd have emptied that shelf. Instead, I just let them sit there. For all I know, they're still there. The police only really get involved in this whole thing because early on in the book, Superintendent Otani is shot in the shoulder in a crowd. And that raises the suspicion early on in the book that maybe someone was trying to kill him, or that someone might hate police, or that it might have something to do with right-left Japanese politics that are at a ferment at the time when this story takes place. Again, that would have made it more interesting to tell me a little more about that, maybe work in a really good red herring along those lines. But no, instead, those kinds of details about political unrest and maybe someone wanting to kill cops in a society where that's virtually unthinkable, is mentioned and then passed by in favor of in favor of something else, something quite else. It comes to light later on in the book that the dead man had a secret will, and that so that takes the usual mystery gimmick of the will and the massive financial motive to find that person dead, and complicates it even further, because a secret will, by its very nature, obviously means that not as many people knew about it. So you have to find out who those people were and narrow your suspect field and whatnot. And we get this. A secret will! Exclamation point. The exclamation point is practically a joke at this point. It sounded distinctly intriguing to me, but after delivering himself of that tidbit of in a meaningful sort of way, Hara had merely gone on to say that he was getting in touch with the dead man's legal advisor. After which he took his leave, and no request for advice, but with a promise to keep me in the picture. Left to myself, I tried to remember what I knew about wills in general. It didn't amount to much, even though in the early years of my police career I was required to study and to pass exams on various aspects of the law. The emphasis naturally was on the penal code, but elements of the post-war civil code were also covered. A legally competent Japanese adult could, I knew, make a valid will by writing the whole thing out personally, dating it, and not only using a registered seal to authenticate it, but also, unusually in Japan, writing his or her own name. Since credit cards became so fashionable, we've had to get used to the idea of signing with a ballpoint pen instead of using the little personal seals most of us always carry. But when the civil code was drawn up, it was an exceptional thing to do. Anyway, a will drawn up in that form was acceptable in law and would generally be kept with other important family papers until needed. Alternatively, and more formally, a will can be dictated to a notary public in the presence of at least 2 witnesses and signed and sealed by all present. I vaguely recalled that there are several other simplified methods that can be used in case of emergency, but the details, if I ever knew them, had long since escaped me. The expression secret will conveyed nothing to me beyond the ordinary everyday meaning of those words, but Hara had spoken them as though they had some technical significance I'd sure to grasp, and I wasn't about to admit my ignorance. So I had recourse to the reference books in the outer office and discovered that there's an authorized variation on the first of the 2 regular procedures I'd remembered, known as the holographic and notarial methods of making a will. If a testator wants its contents to remain confidential until after his or her death, it's permissible for the holographic will to be signed and sealed in the presence of 2 people who haven't read it. Then they watch the author insert the document into an envelope and seal it, and finally all present have to sign and seal the envelope to make it a legal secret will. In spite of all these sophisticated provisions in the civil code, so far as I knew, very few people, Japanese, bother to make wills. I couldn't think of anybody in my own family who ever had one, unless my private circumstances alter dramatically. If my wife really were to leave and divorce me or die before me, for example, I expect to die intestate. No problem. The law, as it stands, provides automatically for widows, children, and other close relatives. And it goes on from there. It goes on like that. And that's not the only passage in here that's like this. That is called an expo dump, and that's not even trying to hide what it is. That's not even trying to hide what it is. It's also not at all what someone would write to a friend. But since Otani is shot, the police are extra involved. They get extra involved. They question a lot of people. A lot of people connected with the dead no enthusiast. And then when you reach the end of the book, I don't want to spoil things too much here, but the end of the book raised again all the questions that I had yesterday about police procedurals. Because that tone that you read there in that gigantic expo dump is mirrored all throughout 98% of this book. 98% of this book is following Otani and his colleagues as they compare notes, have meetings, chase down alibis, check out timetables. And then, towards the end of the book, one of their own is killed. It's not Otani, but one of their own is killed. And suddenly, everything changes. Suddenly, the whole narrative changes. In the very end of the book, we get personal sides to all of these people that have only been inter-office squabbling until now. We get actual passion for solving a crime, for bringing a murderer to justice. We get actual passion for figuring out what the heck that shot that hit Otani was and what it has to do with anything. Because a cop died. Because a cop is murdered. And that raised questions all over for me, again, about why we read police procedurals. This one actually much more so than the last ones, because this one made me feel complicit in, the unbreakable blue wall. This made me feel complicit in a world where there's us and then there's the rest of you. In a way that I didn't like. It didn't feel good at all. In a way that somehow or other, miraculously, Ed McBain manages to avoid in most of his books that are explicitly about cops in a precinct house. He still manages to avoid a lot of that. This book, not only did it not avoid it, it didn't even seem to want to. And I wonder if, I'm not blaming it for not avoiding it, maybe because the author must be writing to a readership that really likes this kind of thing, that really likes that idea that you are on the side of the cops and you'll really care when one of them is hurt or murdered. But it didn't matter in the end anyway, because it was a completely blah experience. I will not, it's lather, rinse, repeat, but I'm not repeating this author. I've done now 2. And in both cases, the organizing conceit of a retired police detective, a superintendent, writing letters about his old cases to a friend is wasted. There are no startling insights. There are no scandalous or behind-the-scenes insights, the kind of thing that a friend might write to a friend, but that a superintendent would never write to an amanuensis. And instead, that's exactly what this feels like. It feels like Otani is sitting down, and instead of writing a letter to a friend, he's writing a murder mystery. It didn't do anything for me. So there's still plenty of days left in March, but I think for the next pick that I do, I'm trying not to guide these things too much, but for the next pick that I pick, no matter what, whether it's something I know really well or something I haven't read in a long time, I think I'm going to veer away from having the police anywhere involved in what I'm doing. Usually, I want them to be partially involved. Usually, I cannot stand the foppish amateur detective who comes in and just sort of swans around solving things. But I want to get that feeling of complicity out of my mind. So I will probably pick something else for next time. And I'm hoping next time will be tomorrow. I'm letting the side down with March Mystery Madness. I'm going to try not to do that. But anyway, that was our mystery for today. I read you the part about secret wills and dying intestate in mid-century Japan. I did not read you the huge info dumps about no theater. I could have, but I spared you. The author didn't spare me, though. Anyway, that's it for today. I'll be back with another mystery next time. Thank you, BookTube.